And his claims that South African white farmers are the target of farm murders. Trump confronting Ramaphosa at the White House with a video purporting rampant farm murders. Let's continue to discuss this with William Bird. He's the Director of Media Monitoring Africa. William, it's great to talk to you. We've been having this discussion at length, of course, as you know, since what unfolded in the Oval Office yesterday. But shall we begin with what many organizations like CNN, I see Reuters has a similar headline as well, but this issue of Oval Office smackdowns. Most recently, we saw it with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and I think going into that meeting yesterday between Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump, perhaps we were scared that was exactly what's going to unfold as well.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that as a white supremacist, he thought that he would be able to easily rile up, some kind of an uppity black president. And unfortunately, he neglected to think about who he was dealing with. Someone who's had to deal with racist whites for many years of his existence, certainly as a trade unionist and certainly as a president. So I suspect, if you're a racist, it's quite easy to underestimate your opponent. I think the thing that's interesting about those meetings and the nature of how they are currently being framed is that they are very much something that is done for television, done as a spectacle in order to assert American dominance, in order to assert the power differential that exists in the USA compared to the countries that come to visit them. And I think that they see that as a very good PR opportunity to show America's power. It's less really about the actual content of it. I imagine that their tactic of ambushing them was to kind of seek to unsettle them as one of their kind of core standard operating procedure or negotiating tactics. It's the kind of thing that you would set up in a game show, that you would do it like that. And I think if you think about the way that President Trump operates as though it's a TV reality show, then it starts to make a lot more sense. And it's also, once you start to appreciate that it's a lot easier to kind of understand why they do the sort of things that they do and why they say the things that they do.
It was quite an ominous moment, wasn't it, William, when the lights were dimmed and everyone turned towards the screen and suddenly this video started playing?
Yeah, I mean, it's purely about the drama of it. It's as if he's going to say, I'm going to show you something that's really going to challenge your view. And of course, as your previous guest, and indeed anyone who's got a basic command of basic facts and evidence can demonstrate that, one video of a politician saying something, even to a full stadium, does not make a genocide. Again, the evidence would need to be clear and overwhelming, and we all know that it isn't the case.
Yeah.
But of course, it is done as a reality TV moment. He's not doing these things because he wants to be transparent. He's doing these things because he wants to show off to the media his exercise of power. He wants people to see that he is friends with some of the best golfers in the world. He wants people to see that he is able to command and bring billionaires to meet with him. And he has no regard for any level of governance or transparency. I mean, to be caught actually admitting to the fact that if our president had taken an airplane to him, he would have taken it happily, I think shows just the character of the person. And I think what that meeting served to demonstrate, and I imagine the Trump team are a little bit obtuse to this, given their racist outlook, is that what it really showed was a person who's in command of his faculties and can be a president, as opposed to someone who likes to act like a president for a reality TV show. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump does hold a lot of the cards in these deals, and it's why you can't just behave as a normal human would and say, I'm not prepared to tolerate this level of patronizing and racism, and thank you very much. So, that's the reality of politics. But certainly it's established as a TV reality show. And when we think about that, it starts to explain his meetings with Zelensky. It starts to explain, his calls for Canada to be a 51st state. And what it also serves to do, more importantly, I think, for the American public, is it serves to distract them from the realities that they're facing. ordinarily, South Africa really shouldn't feature on their map. You know, Marco Rubio admitted in his congressional hearing the other day that they are willing to accept Afrikaners because there's a small number of them. You know, so it makes for good television and it's not a real problem. And of course, you do that when you're trying to distract your population from the fact that your economy is not doing very well, distract them from the fact that you're introducing tariffs, distract them from the fact that you have school shootings on a regular basis in America. We could equally have gone with a lot more compelling evidence and said, actually, you've got a child genocide in the United States of America because you seem to kill your children on an almost weekly basis.
Yeah, I mean, up until today, the statistics tell us that there were more mass shootings in the US than the number of days of the year that we've had. So, yeah, I mean, we could have certainly taken that kind of tack, which was not going to happen because South Africa went there with an agenda. I want to go to just a few sound bites from that briefing yesterday, that interaction yesterday. But I want to just talk to you very briefly, William, about how journalists in South Africa perhaps feel today, having watched what happened in the Oval Office yesterday. I mean, we're reminded quite often by certain politicians, you know, that we're very lucky to have a free media. The US does as well. But our president, to my knowledge, doesn't call journalists who disagree with him jerks or idiots on international television.
No, that's because our president is an adult who has respect for the Constitution that's put him there ultimately. And I think, you know, again, the approach by the Trump regime to media, to journalists in particular, and credible journalists, is to consistently attack, to divert and distract people from the litany of stories that they do about the many, many wrongs of his current government. You know, there's so many issues about the fake savings that DOGE has brought to the American people, to the basic and outright falsification that tariffs are paid by the countries and not by the people that engender them. And yet he then goes to attack the media. Why? Because you want to attack those that are pointing something out, because then you can make it appear as though it's a he said, she said scenario. In South Africa, if our president were to take a similar direction, and we have had leaders that have approached and sought to discredit our media. Indeed, we still have many of them. You know, one of the MK's approaches ahead of the last elections in South Africa was to attack and discredit many of our news media. They were following a very similar agenda, a populist agenda, to say the media won't tell you this, the media won't report this. So it's a common political tactic in order to get people to not look too seriously at what news organizations are doing. The danger with that is that with all the amount of mis and disinformation, and if you look at the way that the Trump regime operates, what they do is they seek to drown people in a deluge of information and of executive orders and of instructions, instead of dealing with issues. And what that does is it overwhelms media. It's a very deliberate tactic. And it also then disempowers audiences because they think, my goodness, there's so many things going on. I can't possibly keep up. I don't want to follow the news because there's so many bad things. And of course, the moment you do that, you start to win your battle towards authoritarianism and you move away from democracy and democratic ideals. So yesterday's meeting, I think, served to highlight a number of things, one of which was to reinforce the critical role that news and journalism plays in holding power to account. You know, our media asked some difficult questions, perhaps not as many as we would have liked, but at least they had the opportunity to be there, and they weren't going to then not challenge on various issues. I think one of the elements of that meeting was the brutal honesty that South Africa displayed in representing our nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, the ANC in Gauteng just, I think last week, talked about how the media is responsible for the decline of the party in Gauteng because of the negative reporting. So yeah, your point is well made. Let's take a listen to what DA leader and Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen had to say in that meeting in the Oval Office yesterday.
The two individuals that are in that video that you've seen are both leaders of opposition minority parties in South Africa. Mkhonto Wesizwe under Mr. Zuma, and the economic freedom fighters under Mr. Malema. Now, the reason that my party, the Democratic Alliance, which has been an opposition party for over 30 years, chose to join hands with Mr. Ramaphosa's party was precisely to keep those people out of power. We cannot have those people sitting in the union buildings making decisions. And that is why after 30 years of us exchanging barbs across the floor in Parliament and trying to get one over on each other, we've decided to join hands.
The people that you saw in that movie, those are officials. Those are people that were in office. They had one march, they had a dance in your parliament, whatever you may call it, legislature.
Well, let me clarify that.
Yeah,
let me clarify that, because what you saw, the speeches that were being made, one, that is not government policy. We have a multi-party democracy in South Africa that allows people to express themselves, political parties to adhere to various policies, and in many cases, or in some cases, those policies do not go along with government policy. Our government policy is completely against what he was saying, even in the parliament. And they're a small minority party, which is allowed to exist in terms of our constitution.
but you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
And then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No, there is
Nothing happens to
There
them.
is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people. And we have now
The
been
farmers are
utilized.
black. The farmers are not black.
We
I don't
now-
say that's good or bad, but the farmers are not black. And the people that are being killed in large numbers, and you saw all those grave sites, and those are people that loved ones going, I guess on a Sunday morning, they told me, to pay respect to their loved ones that were killed. Their heads chopped off, they died violently. And, you know, I mean, we're here to talk about it.
William, I'm just going to throw straight through you.
Yeah, I mean, delusional and embarrassing that a world leader and such a prominent one would just make stuff up. And I guess you can see the challenge that our president had in trying to explain what a constitutional democracy is to the president of the United States, who you think would have at least had a passing knowledge of their constitution, given that he's now the representative of it to Sanji. Again, it speaks to this idea of the complexity of a democracy. Now, we know in South Africa that that particular song had gone all the way to our constitutional court. And there, you know, a number of our brightest legal minds considered all of the arguments over a series of days. They weighed up all of those things and they said, on the basis of that particular context, on the basis of that particular framing of it, it did not constitute hate speech. Now, that's not to say that in a different context it may be something else, but in that context it was found not to be. And that's the definition of a constitutional democracy. You hear words and you hear things that you don't like, that may anger you and that you may even find outrageous. So we can all, for example, express our anger and our frustration and shock and disbelief at the fact that the President of the United States can operate a meeting on such a spectacularly uninformed basis when he meets with the president. You know, it's as if he was thinking he was meeting with another toddler, and maybe if he had that those kind of tricks would have worked. But the reality is simply that is a device in order to seek to persuade people that there's something bad going on there, that we're trying to hide it, that America's trying to do something good about it. And what does that do? It makes the general audience in America, remember that their audience was not us as South Africans, their audience was the American populace. Mm-hmm. So you have to explain to Americans, why have you got these people there? Oh, it's because you're trying to do a good thing. with them and stopping these whites from being killed. And they need to believe that that's happening in order for them to see that there's something that they can be angry about that isn't what's happening in their hometown.
Yeah.
You know, if you go back and look at the history of how news, particularly the reporting of Africa, occurred in colonial periods, one of the reasons that Africa was reported as a particular place of disaster and violence was so that it served to remind the people back home that they weren't living there. It served to make them think that their problems back home weren't as bad. Now you take that model and you lift it to there in that period, it does a similar purpose. It says these unruly, unwieldy black people are killing white people back in South Africa, stealing their lands, chopping their heads off. Don't worry, we're not that bad. Everything's great in America.
Yeah. William, I hope you're not applying to the US for a visa anytime soon. I want to just ask you about, statements the likes of which Afro Forum has issued just earlier today in response to this Oval Office meeting. And it's a long one. I'm just going to read one portion of it where it talks about the publication of draconian racial regulations that enforce strict racial quotas in the workplace and in the economy, the denial of human rights violation as seen in farm murders, and legislation that allows for expropriation without compensation. I mean, when South Africa is trying to tell the story about the expropriation legislation, for example, organizations like Afro Forum don't make it very easy, shall we say?
No, and they don't. And the beauty of our democracy is that just as we don't attempt to silence Julius Malema, we don't attempt to silence Afro Forum. This is the way that a democracy works. It's big, it can be very ugly, it can be very nasty, and bad things can happen, in the words of Mr. Trump. But the reality is that you can have those extraordinarily diverse and differing views, right?
Yeah.
The issue is that you hear them, you allow people to engage, to think about them, to challenge them, and then you want people to be able to make up their minds. So Afro Forum can go and say that, but then people need to go and actually read the pieces of legislation that they're referring to. The Employment Equity Act, the PAPUDA, we've got a range of things. People far too often do get away with awful violent crime in South Africa. Most of it occurs in poor areas where people are murdered and there's insufficient investigation. Hell, even when we murder our football captain, Senzo Mayiwe, it seems that we can't, we can't find an easy response to that and good police work. So it's not like this is something that is there and is joyous, but to suggest that it's, that those are, as human rights violations are simply ignored again is a significant stretch of the truth. And again, given what we know Afro Forum is arguing for, what they're asserting for, that's fine. We understand where they're coming from. We can call them out on the things where they are spreading misinformation, and we can then hold them accountable as through different fora. That's what democracy is. Democracy isn't, as Mr. Trump would have us believe, where if someone says something you don't like, it must be false. And that's the kind of angle and line that they are pushing in America, which is a fundamentally anti-democratic line, attacking news organizations and saying they don't report on these things, making things up. Is certainly a gross dereliction of his duty, but it also suggests a very different approach to understanding democracy from ours, with all its messiness and with all its challenges. I think that South Africa can stand proud in the fact that we can allow for that messy diversity.
William Bird, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on. Director of Media Monitoring Africa, and I think important advice there. When we do see pieces of information, I think all of us have the duty to go and read, check that our sources are reliable sources and that they are from proper news outlets, and go and read the pieces of legislation concerned and then make up your minds.